I've never seen something like this, so I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do.
Yeah.
Now, when states sue other states, the Supreme Court does have original jurisdiction, but usually that's used like for things like water disputes or
Right.
I've never seen anything quite like this before.
So you're skeptical they would take it up?
Well, I think they have to decide one way or the other, but I think it's pretty much unprecedented.
It's a simply madness, which is the idea of supplanting the vote of the people with partisan legislators is so completely out of our national character that it's simply mad. Of course, the president has the right to challenge results in court, to have recounts, but this effort to subvert the vote of the people is dangerous and destructive to the cause of democracy.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. The Republican Party, as it has existed since its inception, is now officially gone. In its place, a gang of men and women who are now stained with the same dishonor as someone who stands by and watches a violent crime take place without doing or saying anything to stop it. In this case, the innocent victim is our democracy, and the bully beating it up is Donald Trump. But the reason the beating is still going on right now, today, is because more than 200 elected Republicans in Congress and now more than a dozen state attorneys general are helping Trump by standing by and doing nothing, and in some instances aiding him in his assault. An escalation in the president's war to overturn the will of the people of this country, an effort described as unprecedented and madness, has cemented the party's subservience to Donald Trump. The president today met with attorneys general of several states, many of whom were among the 17 who filed a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court to show their support for a case launched by the Texas AG that attempts to invalidate Biden's win in 4 battleground states, none of which his own. The case, which many legal experts say is doomed to fail, aims to overturn the results in Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Chris Carr, the attorney general for Georgia, called the lawsuit constitutionally, legally, and factually wrong, prompting Trump to call him. And according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Trump warned Carr not to rally other Republicans against the lawsuit. Trump is not stopping at lobbying attorneys general. He's trying to work over members of Congress as well. The Washington Post reports this, quote, "The president has been calling Republicans, imploring them to keep fighting and more loudly proclaim the election was stolen, while pressing them on what they plan to do." He spoke to Arizona GOP party chairwoman Kelly Ward and Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana, head of the Conservative Republican Study Committee. Johnson, in fact, according to NBC News, reached out to his GOP colleagues about supporting the Texas lawsuit and sent an email with the subject line, quote, "Time-sensitive request from President Trump." The inside of his email sounds remarkably like it was written by a mob boss. Quote, "Trump specifically asked me to contact all Republican members of the House and Senate today and request that all join on to our brief. He said he will be anxiously awaiting the final list to review." Donald Trump using his bully pulpit to get his party to defend him, even as he actively works to dismantle our democracy. And why would they go along with him? As the New York Times writes, it is all a political calculation. The willingness of so many Republican politicians to publicly involve themselves in a legal campaign to invalidate the ballots of millions of Americans shows how singular a figure Mr. Trump remains in the GOP. Even in defeat, a reality that a significant number of Republicans refuse to accept, polls show allegiance to Mr. Trump is viewed as the ticket to higher office. The GOP's complete capitulation to Donald Trump is where we start this hour with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. Jason Johnson's back, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, and both the MSNBC and GRIO contributor is here. Plus, Washington Post national political reporter and MSNBC political analyst Robert Costa is back, and former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI and MSNBC national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi. Robert Costa, I want to ask you about that sound we came in on. John Cornyn and Mitt Romney calling it madness, unprecedented. I just had Greg Bluestein from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on. I asked him why 4 statewide elected Republicans in that state are so willing to acknowledge the fact when none of the Republicans in Congress really are. And I wonder what you think delineates now a Raffensperger or a Sterling or a Carr from all the Republicans in Washington.
Nicole, what differentiates those Republicans in Georgia and those Republicans you played at the beginning of the program at 5 o'clock is the location of their comments. And what I mean by that is when you heard Senator Cornyn and Senator Romney, they were speaking at the Capitol. They are in the Republican Party, yet somewhat isolated, pretty isolated, in fact, from President Trump's inner circle. And that's the difference now between this moment and in the summer of 1974 when Senator Barry Goldwater and other Republicans went to Richard Nixon and said, it's over, it's time to go. And that was, of course, during Watergate, a different context, but similar in the sense that both parties now are grappling with a president who's embattled. But at that time, they were closer to Nixon than the current GOP is to Trump. The current GOP is in the trenches with President Trump, but they don't have the relationship to really nudge him along.
I want to show all of you what Trump does to one man's soul. Here's what Ted Cruz thought of Donald Trump just a couple years ago.
I'm going to tell you what I really think of Donald Trump. This man is a pathological liar. He doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth.
It's not easy to tick me off. I don't get angry often. But you mess with my wife, you mess with my kids, that'll do it every time. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
So to anyone who ever covered Kamala Harris having a debate with Joe Biden on the debate stage and asked how they could be on the same ticket, I want them to play that tape before, after, and during the segment. Ted Cruz thought Donald Trump was a sniveling coward. What Donald Trump did was actually unprecedented. He attacked Ted Cruz's wife when they were opponents in the 2016 primary. But here's why it's news today. New York Times is reporting that Trump asked Ted Cruz to argue this BS case in front of the Supreme Court, and Ted Cruz said yes. So, Jason, just help me understand what Trump does and that loyalty Bob Costa just explained to one's soul.
You know what, Nicole? This is why we're happy that we're getting a Biden-Harris administration because, you know, when Doug Emhoff saw someone just approach his wife with aggression, he was about to jump off stage last year. Our friend Corinne had to hold somebody back. Ted Cruz's wife was insulted, and his kids, and his father by President Trump, and he's become his supplicant. He's become his reek, his lawyer for the last 4 years. It is an embarrassing lack of integrity from somebody who claims that they are a tough individual from the Lone Star State. But, Nicole, this is the larger issue here. The Republican Party have all become these sort of suckers to the scam of Donald Trump. That email, I think this is important, that email from Mike Johnson, time-sensitive issue from Donald Trump. That sounds like a scam from a third-world country, right? Hey, I'm the missing prince, et cetera, et cetera. But that's been this whole administration. It's a scam. Buy in. Buy my stakes. Buy my conspiracy theory. Buy my nonsense about COVID. And Ted Cruz is one of the many individuals that get involved. And I think, Nicole, what disturbs me most about this is after Ted Cruz goes and shames himself in front of the Supreme Court, which he will if it even gets that far, what is he going to have to show for it? Donald Trump will be out of office on January 20th, and none of these men and women who have shamed themselves for him will have any sort of political power afterwards other than worshiping a guy who never cared about him.
Well, and the other point is that Donald Trump doesn't actually have much affinity for his most loyal fans. He wants to win over he watches Morning Joe more than he watches Fox and Friends. He won't care about Ted Cruz when this is over. He'll be trying to win over the next sucker. This is turning to a place where it isn't just about political subservience, Frank Figliuzzi. A Quinnipiac poll out today says that 77% of Republicans believe there was widespread fraud. If you think that Joe Biden won because of fraud, and that emotion is already inspiring protests outside the homes of state election officials, state secretaries of state. You've got this bogus Supreme Court case that conservative commentators and hosts are giving more oxygen than even they must know it warrants. Clint Watts said there's some very real concern about just a strike of a match leading to violence. What is your degree of concern?
It's the highest it's been since the Trump administration's been in power. And here's why. And I have to tell you, I say this with weariness because I'm growing tired of being, the guy who comes on and says the sky is falling. But I'm here to tell you that I have no other training than to compare this and what we're seeing here to a radicalization process that leads to a flashpoint that leads to violence. And the fact that people in suits and ties and expensive shoes who live in nice homes and have advanced degrees, some of them law degrees, and have fancy titles, they're elected officials, are all buying into this actually makes this mainstream madness. Up until now, we've really been able to kind of comfort ourselves, Nicole, by saying, all of this craziness is part of some lunatic fringe, and I need not worry about those people. They're strange people. They're not a part of our culture. But I think what we've gotten over the last 2 weeks or so, and even in the last 2 days, is proof positive that this is no longer lunatic fringe stuff. This is now part of our mainstream. And what does that do from a security perspective? It legitimizes it in everybody's eyes. So the numbers are going to climb of the percentage of Republicans who think, yeah, there was something wrong with this election process. I can't tell you what it was, but boy, I think it's true. And what that means is when you see this radicalization process, when you see it mainstreamed, when you see a flashpoint coming, meaning that what the outcome they wanted isn't going to happen. Eventually, the Supreme Court's going to say, no, you got nothing. And it's the court of last resort. And so what cults do in those circumstances, what organizations that seek violence do, is they do something called forcing the end. They make happen what they wanted to happen when they see it's not really going to happen without them. And that's when the violence occurs. And that's what I'm most concerned about.
Frank Figliuzzi, having been a senior official at the FBI, what do you think they're doing and watching right now in terms of this torquing up, as you described? Ashley Parker, Bob's colleague, described Donald Trump as becoming radicalized, basically by turning more to the right in terms of what he views, turning to conspiracy theory networks, by taking his base of support with him. So this word is out there, both in political coverage and, as you describe, in the mainstreaming of the conspiracy theories. And it's showing up in polls. 77% of Republicans think there was fraud. There was no fraud. AG Bill Barr said there was no fraud. Lifelong Republican Chris Krebs said there was no fraud. There was no fraud. But what do you think the fact that 80% of Republicans think there was, and that Donald Trump seems to be growing more radicalized himself, what do you think the preparations are from law enforcement?
I can tell you this, there are preparations and there is monitoring occurring and there is concern. And so even those in the private sector who spend their career studying both publicly available and private chat rooms, websites of fringe groups, violence groups, militia groups, et cetera, you can rattle off all the names. They're seeing an increased move toward amassing of weapons, calling for violence, and clear indication that they're waiting for a signal. And who are they waiting for that signal from? Their leader, Donald Trump. And so I vacillate almost on an hourly basis, Nicole, on whether or not the media should give one iota more of attention to this president and his rantings. And I have to tell you, there's still security value in understanding what he's saying, because you might not give it any coverage on MSNBC. And maybe they all decide to shut it down. But let me tell you something. He's messaging the people who will carry out the violence. And we need to know that. It better not be a surprise to us. So for that reason alone, sadly, it still merits coverage, because if only from a security perspective, we need to know where this journey is headed.
Bob Cross, I grapple with the same thing. And I think Ashley Parker, kind of hit the nail on the head as to why. Trump is, she described, become more radicalized, and described him turning to these more radicalized outlets. And so he's having a conversation with his supporters over on Newsmax. He is easier to ignore, but he's probably more dangerous than at any other point in his presidency. Is this really not the off-ramp that all these Republicans who have privately called him a scumbag after the Access Hollywood tape came back, a prince with his incompetent son-in-law shutting down the government? I mean, they have trashed him for 4 years. They finally have an escape hatch. He lost fair and square and resoundingly. Why are they still participating?
They do not see it as an escape hatch or an off-ramp, but a return to form. Remember, this is a president who 10 years ago was mounting a birther campaign against President Obama, questioning his place of birth, his love of country, and his credentials. This is who he is. This is who he has been. They have been accepting it for nearly a decade inside of the Republican Party at its highest levels and also within the grassroots. And now in 2020, at the end of the year, common sense would say, oh, they're ready to move on. But privately and often publicly through their actions, there's an acknowledgement that President Trump might be leaving. He is leaving. Joe Biden is the president-elect, but he remains in control. They almost feel like they can't maneuver outside of his shadow, and no one really has a path outside of it. There's no so-called exit ramp from a shadow that looms over everything in your political life.
I mean, Jason Johnson, I believe, and I think Bob's right, that that's how they feel. But that's like saying no one could escape the mob. And look, I've read a lot of mob books. In a lot of cases, that was true. They'd come and they'd find you. But the noble ones at least tried.
Yeah, they did, and then they ended up sort of swimming with the fishes, right? And that's what these guys think. They all think if they leave the family that something's going to happen to them. But Nicole, I look at it as another way. If you are a conservative Republican, Donald Trump gave you tax cuts. He gutted regulations that protected women and minorities. He gutted regulations for voting. He gutted environmental regulations. If you look at it from the policy perspective, yes, he wasted a lot of money and messed with the budget, but Donald Trump delivered a whole lot of things that Republicans have always wanted in a shameless and offensive way. He's like a dirty cop in a movie. It's like, well, he's a bad guy and he smokes too much and he's mean to his ex-wife, but darn it, he gets the job done. If you are a Republican, Donald Trump has been good for you policy-wise. So I understand if they think that, all right, if accepting Trump means he has to insult me and occasionally people are going to threaten my house, they think it's fine because they worship the ideology, certain Republican ideologies, the same way other people worship the Bible, the Quran, or the Talmud. So that's what's happening right now. I don't think they're going to escape. And after January 20th, and I agree with Frank, there will be violence. There will be blood. You've got people out there. Trump told them stand back and stand by. Do you think those people, they're spending their Christmas season buying guns right now while the rest of us are trying to get gifts. They're going to be ready when the sign happens. And even once Trump is out of office, you will have this fight amongst Republicans to say, look at the policies accomplished. I want to be the next Donald Trump, or at least be his supplicant in the White House. So I don't see any of them leaving. They're committed to this nonsense. They're committed to the lie, and they will look the other way when the violence hits them and their own communities, because the ideology is more important to them than the health of our democracy.
Jason Johnson, Robert Costa, Frank Figluzzi, thank you for your candor and your insights and your reporting today, and thank you for starting us off. When we return,